Right. Welcome, everyone. Um, Welcome to the latest Gen3 Community Forum. Today, we have a really important topic that I'm excited about, is how to contribute to the Gen3 source code. Gen3 has always been open source, but I think we'll all admit that we haven't done as good of a job as we would like in welcoming community contributions. And so today, um, or leading up to this meeting, we've made an effort to create additional processes and documentation to hopefully make this a lot easier and more enjoyable for everybody. So yeah, really excited to share this with you. Just some housekeeping. You should all be muted by default. Just, I guess, keep on mute. We'll have plenty of time for discussion at the end. So you feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout, though. And then at the end, if you want to do audio, you could unmute and ask them. So next slide. Okay, so I'm just going to kick this off and hand it over to some other speakers. First, we're going to hear from Bob Grossman, Director of CCDS, on general open source principles that our approach will abide by. And then we're going to talk about how to engage with the Gen3 team, including asking questions, submitting issues, and really the meat of the matter is the submitting PRs to GitHub. And then we'll kind of round it out with a couple of concrete examples of PRs that have been submitted by the community in the past. And then finally, we'll have quite a bit of time for discussion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bob to talk about open source principles. I think you're on mute, Bob.
Thank you. More precisely, we're talking about how Gen3 is, what principles is Gen3 following to grow our open source community. Next slide. So all the code, is available in GitHub, and it has an Apache 2.0 license, as I think most people know, so that you can modify the code and use it both in your academic and commercial and government projects. The Center for Translational Data Science is the maintainer organization, and we are always interested in hearing as quickly as possible about bugs, about feature requests as Gen3 develops. As is standard now, we add to the Gen3 code base via pull requests. Now, Gen3 has essentially no unrestricted funding. And that means, we have people who work on projects, and those projects use Gen3, and those projects contribute to Gen3, and they run under a fair amount of security and compliance. And so there's a fairly elaborate process to test the code and to make sure the code doesn't break any of our projects. The good news is we can run commons with the right security and with the right operating and that operate with good service level agreements. But the flip side of that is it's been, although there, a lot of, although, most of the people on the call are associated with organizations that independently run Gen3 Commons, this is sometimes more of a struggle than it should be. And code that is developed by different organizations, it has does not have an easy path to get back in. So over almost the last year, we've been trying to address this in different ways. We've made it easier to run Gen3 by going into Helm charts. We're going to take some other actions that's going to make it easier for organizations to run Gen3. individual commons with Gen 3.2 that was described in a prior call are going to be able to consolidate their code in a particular in their own GitHub repository and integrate that code in a nice way with the general Gen 3.2 build. But the purpose of this call is to provide some dedicated resources to announce the availability of some dedicated resources, not full resources, but significant fractions of resources that are there to respond to community pull requests. And to start the process, as you hear, to share testing apparatus so that it's easier for the community to test code, to make it easier for the maintainer organization, the University of Chicago Center for Translational Data Science, to bring that code back into the code base. At a high level, we're talking about the specific changes that you'll hear about over the next 45 minutes so that we have time for questions that will make it easier to set up and operate Gen3, but to get your code request approved. And we have guidance now and a whole processes to do this. So for those of you who've bared with us over the last period of time, thank you. And hopefully things will be much easier in the future. That's all I had to say. There'll be plenty of time for questions later, but that's the sort of high-level overview.
Great. Thanks, Bob. I will take the next few slides. So we wanted to put the sort of code contribution into a broader context of how you should engage with the Gen3 team. So next slide. So I wouldn't start if you identify, a need with writing out a complicated pull request or some complicated code. I would recommend you start with the conversation on Slack. When you first encounter sort of a limitation or a bug, that's a good place to get feedback from either the Gen3 team or the community. You might figure out that there is a way around whatever the limitation you perceive, or there's a solution at hand. I would start there. A great place to do that is in Slack, which is that Gen3 community channel that's mentioned there. We also have a forum, and you could email us as well, but Slack is the best place for conversations. You don't have to submit or start a conversation before submitting an issue in GitHub or a pull request, but as I said, I think it could be helpful. And we'll outline a few reasons why we, may not be able to at first pass accept your code. So, for you to hear those on the front end is probably helpful rather than spending a significant amount of time developing a solution. Next slide. Okay, so one thing in the lead up to this meeting one change we've made is that every Gen3 repo now has an issues tab. So this has been turned off, hasn't been available for some time. So it's an improvement to have this available. Please use them. So issues are there for you to submit that are either bugs you've identified or a feature request. And there should be a template for those two types of issues. If you're not sure, the one thing I wanted to mention is that Gen3 has a lot of repositories, hundreds, in fact. And so you, as a community member, may not always know which is the appropriate repository to submit an issue, and that makes sense. So we've also created a new repository called Gen3 Community within Gen3, and you can use this repo to put feature requests and issues that span, multiple repositories, or they're like a complicated bug or feature request, or if you're just not sure where to put it, which is also reasonable. So please check out this Gen3 community repository. And by the way, there's links in the back of this at the end of these slides that for this and other things. So you should have access to it. When you're creating an issue, look for existing issues before you post. One of the benefits of issues is that you can respond to issues that other people have posted. So this is a great way to give feedback or add additional information. And it's great for us if there's not multiple issues that relate to the same underlying topic. So yeah, please take a look. One thing I'm really trying to highlight here is do not post any personally identifiable information in a GitHub issue. We've run into this in the past. This includes the likely suspects of name, etc., but also things that you might not know, IP addresses, host names, and tokens. Be sure if you're posting any code, don't post those as well, secrets into GitHub issues. Next slide. Okay, one more slide about issues. So once these are created, they'll be reviewed by a member of the CTDS staff. So you should initially see it as waiting for triage. After that, the status will depend on whether it is under active development, requires further review, requires additional information, or eventually closed. So internal to CTDS, we'll be tracking these with Jira tickets, but you should be able to see the status with a tag. And I think we mention it later, but if you need feedback on the status or you're wanting to know, feel free to reach out to me or whatever staff member you've been communicating with, and they should be able to provide additional information if you have questions about an issue or later a pull request that you've submitted. Okay, next slide. All right. So with this, I'm going to hand it over to Peter Vassilatos, who's our Director of Engineering at CTDS, and he'll be able to explain to you what our protocol or details for how to submit a pull request to Gen3 and GitHub. So Peter.
Thanks, Michael. So if you know that there's specific code changes that you've made and you know what they are, and you want to submit them, you can submit a pull request directly against the repository that has that code. If it's, if you have a feature request or you have a concern about something that you haven't actually written the code for, it probably makes sense to put an issue in that Gen3 community repository or to bring it up on Slack. But for actual code changes that you have, please submit a pull request. As Bob noted earlier, all the contributions into Gen3 are subject to the Apache 2.0 license, so just make sure you're aware of that. You don't need to create an issue if you're going to submit code. If you're submitting a complicated change or you're starting to work on a complicated change, it does make some sense to engage with us first. I think that's noted on a later slide. But if you've fixed a bug, you've added some functionality which you think will be useful to the community, you can just create the pull request. The description of the pull request is where you can put whatever appropriate information you need to contextualize it. For the process for this, I'm sure you're all familiar with submitting pull requests, but make the request against the main branch or the master branch, or in some cases we have legacy nomenclature still in the repository. So check out the main branch, submit pull requests against that. When you are submitting your code changes, please remember, in order for things to be approved, to be brought into Gen3, there do need to be unit tests that run. So if you've changed something, put an eye on the unit tests, consider updating the unit tests to include the functionality that you've included or adjust them if the functionality that you're submitting makes things perform a little bit differently. You may need to add completely new unit tests. And that is as valuable as the changes that you're that you're submitting. So please remember that. Run your tests first, run the set of unit tests against your code before you submit the pull request. It'll save us all a lot of time and trouble if you make sure that things are running. Bob mentioned making more test capabilities available. This is true. We are working on integration test capabilities. I hope to be able to share information about that with you maybe at the next community forum. But this is active work that we're starting to use. We're rolling out. We're coordinating it with the Helm updates. So there's a little bit of coordination to migrate from internally from the old mechanism of test to the new. And we're trying to work out all of the pain points so that we can share this with you. But that's coming. It's imminent. And it's very exciting for us. That will mean that you can not only contribute to Gen 3 by code submissions, but actually by enhancing the integration tests once this is complete, which would also be a huge boon to the community. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. Gen 3 does have a lot of repositories. One of the things that we're trying to do is weed that down. In addition to just the refocusing on the open source community, on changing some allocations of resources internally, opening up issues, getting some additional tooling inside CEDIS to help us manage this. We're also trying to make some other changes, such as reducing the number of repositories, simplifying what it is that you have to interface with if you're using Gen 3 or developing Gen 3. So that said, we do want to keep the complexity down. The granularity of your commits makes a difference. When we're trying to analyze submitted code, having clear, logically separated out units of change is extremely helpful, not just for those of us inside of CEDIS who will be looking at and approving the code, but also in the future if other folks are reviewing it, and for people who are just looking at the source code and trying to understand what's happening. So please choose the granularity deliberately. Ideally, submit logical changes in separate commits. Follow standard practices. We like the pro Git guidelines. We reference them in the Gen 3 contributor guidelines, but clear and informative commit messages will be extremely helpful. If there's a GitHub issue, so if you had started a conversation in GitHub before going ahead and producing code, or if something has started as a bug which you'd raised as an issue, and then later you actually solved it and submitted code for it, for example, please reference this issue number inside of the pull request description itself. When your pull request is made, as Michael said, someone from CEDIS may reach out to get additional context, more information, or give you some feedback on it. Just at early stages. Can we go to the next slide, please? What's going to happen after the PR is submitted is that it's going to be tracked internally. We actually have a few systems that we're using. These are internal, so the details don't help you a lot. Your interface to all of this really is GitHub, the issues that you're submitted there, the PR that you've submitted there, and the feedback that you see there. But internally, we're tracking and gathering statistics on changes, both internal and external, and we're tracking the requests for allocation to resources using our internal tooling. So within CEDIS, we do a fairly high amount of triage of tickets across the many projects that are being managed. And so there's several times a week, the group of senior engineers gets together and looks at all of the incoming tickets, and we sort things out. We assess the priority of them, the relevance of them to the product, et cetera. And so the external PRs are just being incorporated directly into that flow. So we'll be assessing them as they come in, and then allocating them for prioritization and development, and you'll be receiving feedback about that. If your PR is approved, that's great. I mean, there may be some back and forth with whoever it is internally at CEDIS who's testing it and reviewing it. If for some reason the PR isn't approved, then we'll make sure that you get feedback about that. This will probably come through the user services team, or maybe directly from a developer who's been working with the code. And we'll talk to you about the rationale for not approving it and then possible steps to modify it so that it can be approved and brought into the Gen3 code base. And there's a lot of reasons. Bob touched on some of these in the Gen3 open source principles at the beginning of the meeting today. So one of the big ones is we do live under a fairly rigorous security regime. And it is possible that a code that you introduce has insecure dependencies or follows some coding pattern that is, that isn't permissible under FedRAMP. Hopefully we would be able to work with you and get that straightened up if that was the case. But there's other reasons. It's possible that code might need to get updated to follow Gen3 coding conventions more closely. And then there's two reasons that I think might pop up that will be a little bit tricky. There is a Gen3 product vision. Last time we met in this forum, we talked about the roadmap. We'd like to do a whole lot more than what's on the roadmap, but there's a definite direction for Gen3. And if pull requests are trying to move the product in a different direction from what the community at large is advocating for, what the steering committee is advocating for the direction of the product, then that might be a reason why, no matter how excellent the PR is, it can't be included. Also, as Bob said, we have resources that are allocated to Gen3 projects, but anything that comes into our core product needs to be supported by the team at CEDIS. And so we need to be realistic about what it is we can support. If you introduce new technologies, things that are, outside of our, current set of commonly used technologies and are fast changing, and we need to keep on top of it to continually patch and update it. We need to be sensitive to that. And so it's possible that some of those things might need to, maybe not immediately be incorporated into Gen3. Maybe we need to defer until it's more stable or until we have the resources available to take proper ownership to maintain those things and make sure that they stay available for the community. We're looking at ways to deal with this. I think this is an interesting challenge because there's a lot of we're looking at ways that we could possibly deal with different tiers of things that CEDIS provides. The core product, which we always support, we always have to maintain to security standards, et cetera. But it's possible there might be different tiers of things that are supported, but maybe not used inside of the FedRAMP environment, but useful to people running their own projects that we might be able to help the community make available. That's another conversation for a different time, though. So if your contribution is accepted, it's possible this will be after modifications that we make to it or that we ask you to make to it. And in that case, if you're making changes, really, you can just push against the same branch. That will update the full request. Can we go to the next slide, Faye? Okay, I mentioned this before. Your status will be available in GitHub, and you will be able to see some progress. Depending on the complexity of the submission, it might be quicker, it might take a little bit longer, but we are trying to engage with the initial response as quickly as we can. And if there's immediate feedback that could be given, we're trying to do that as quickly as possible. Michael mentioned this, but you can reach out to Michael or to other staff members if you've been working with somebody else specifically on the ticket if you need additional status updates. Can we move? Yeah. All right. So Gen3, as we've said, does stretch across a number of services, a number of repositories. There's really no limit on what it is that you can propose and submit a pull request for. However, if things are significantly, they involve dramatic changes to Gen3, we'll probably need to coordinate very closely. There's some very valuable contributions you might make, but if you're ripping out a core service or changing fundamental relationships between services, it will require working together on those things. So if you're contemplating a big change, it makes a lot of sense that you reach out to us first if you want to submit it back to the community. So if, if you're working on something for your project, you're at an early stage in it and you realize this may have value to the community at large, you want to submit it back in, continue to help develop Gen3, please start that conversation with us sooner. I think we can avoid a number of potential pitfalls or even coordination of development. If you're affecting a lot of services, we can make sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes, that we have aligned designs, etc. So, and with an eye to that, there are some, in the future, I think it would be great for us to have working groups designed around features. I think the steering committee has talked about that. Okay. Michael, I think we're taking questions at the end, right? Questions and discussion.
Yes, at the end.
So, okay. Well, then let's move on. We have Gen3, a couple of Gen3 developers you may well know. Binam and Pauline are going to talk about some actual contributions that they have worked with, in recent times, and just kind of talk through some of the kinds of things that get submitted to Gen3. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Binam. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. So I'll be talking about some of the PRs I've recently reviewed and worked on with the folks over at the OHSU team. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the first issue involves the Gen3 client. The Gen3 client contains multiple commands to upload data into a bucket. These commands initially required the local file names to be the same as the object ID in the upload manifest in order to validate the manifest and upload the data. These object IDs are usually non-human readable UUIDs. With the help of the OHSU team, we can now upload files based on file name rather than just the object ID. We see the value of being able to upload files that don't necessarily have UUIDs as their file names. We had a little bit of back and forth with this PR about testing and making sure the functionality worked for all of our upload commands, and that it still worked with our existing requirement for object IDs. This PR fed into another PR that adds an option to select a specific bit for data uploads with the Gen3 client. The next slide, please. Yeah, the second PR involves Fence, our authentication service. The issue was when deleting files from a non-AWS S3 bucket like Minio, we would encounter an AWS access key ID error. The PR created by the OHSU team generalizes functionality of our object retrieval, upload, and delete so that it works with any S3 compatible APIs. At Gen3, as Peter mentioned earlier, we try to make sure there's coverage for all of our new code. So during our review process, we asked for unit test and for unit test for the newly added functionalities. We also work with the OHSU team to make sure this works with a real non-AWS S3 buckets and that it continues working for AWS S3 buckets. So yeah, with this PR, storage solutions like Minio, Wasabi, that provides S3 compatible APIs will be supported by Fence. And yeah, just want to give a shout out to the OHSU team. And next, I think we have Pauline.
Hello. Another contribution we have accepted recently was made by Luca at the Pediatric Cancer Data Comments. So Luca reached out on Slack. He was asking whether the Guppy service supports client credentials access tokens. Those are tokens that are issued from the OIDC client credentials flow, which was added recently to Gen3, well, fairly recently. Those tokens are linked to an OIDC client and they're not linked to a user. A lot of features and services in Gen3 have been updated to support those tokens. but not all. They've been updated kind of on a as needed basis. And Guppy had not been updated yet, so the answer was no, that's not supported. The main reason it's not supported is because the Arborist endpoint used by Guppy did not accept any tokens as input. So not just those tokens that are linked to a client, just no tokens. So we discussed this on Slack a little bit, try to figure out what's the best way to add this support in Guppy. The reason we discussed it so much is because any update to the authorization service has to be thought through and reviewed carefully. So after a little bit of back and forth on Slack, we gave some guidance to Luca, who ended up submitting 2 pull requests to add this to Arborist and Guppy. So the first update is in Arborist to support those client credentials tokens. We chose to update the post auth mapping endpoint. This one did not accept token as inputs, but it already accepted, it was already able to return a client's access instead of a user's access. So it was a fairly straightforward update, just adding token support. And the second update is in Guppy, simply calling this endpoint that now supports tokens instead of what the logic was before, which was calling a different endpoint. So there was a bit of back and forth after Luca submitted those PRs. The first one was because we wanted to add unit tests, specifically in Arborist. Like I said, anything touching authorization has to be tested very thoroughly. We make sure unit tests covering all the edge cases are there. We also do some manual testing on our side. Something else we added was documentation, of course. And the third thing we discussed with Luca was backwards compatibility. The changes worked fine when both Guppy and Arborist were updated at the same time. But if someone wanted to use the new version of Guppy, but was still using an old version of Arborist, for example, Guppy would call that new version of the endpoint that would not support tokens yet. So we asked Luca to make an update to his Guppy PR so that if that happens, Guppy will fall back to the old logic and everything will keep working. And the fourth thing that we had some back and forth about was about consistency in Arborist behavior in the case when the user is not authenticated. So no token is posted and there's no username. So here it was more of a good to have on our side. So it was out of scope for Luca's change. It had nothing to do with client credentials token support. So that's why this change was made on our side on top of Luca's PR. And all of this was merged, I think, about a week ago. It will be the next software release. And I think Luca is listening. So thank you for your contribution, Luca.
Thanks, Pauline. Thanks, everyone. I think hopefully this gave everybody a good background of the process that we're laying out. I think we said as much at the beginning, but I'll just reiterate now that this is a new process that we're laying out, and it's sort of under active refinement. So you should expect to see changes to some of the documentation or guidance in the coming weeks and months as we get pull requests and as we encounter new situations, or we'll realize that we should be giving different advice, etc. Hopefully at some point down the road we can give some, I don't know, clear estimation of when you can expect a review or feedback. I think right now, as we're just rolling this out, we will not be able to give you a specific number there, but I can tell you that we will review them. weekly. And so hopefully it will be able to give you some feedback, fairly quickly on what we're seeing. So I did want to give that additional bit of guidance before we turn it over to questions. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to add about the example pull requests. Those aren't meant to limit, your creativity and things that you would like to contribute to Gen3. They're just some examples, recent examples. They aren't meant to just to put some concreteness behind, what we're discussing. But we fully expect that the community may want to submit code for, any and all Gen3 services. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the community for any questions if you like. Please type in, or if you like, you could raise your hand. Okay, let me start off. I'll start off with a question. Seed the room with a question. So maybe Peter, this is for you. We were talking about this, in fact, earlier today. So on the topic of the testing that in the future will be rolled out or made available, the integration tests. In the meantime, since we don't have those available, can we give any guidance on what sort of things contributors should be thinking about in terms of what we would like to see that would be helpful for Gen3 developers to see the results of?
Yeah, it's a good question, Michael. So there's a couple of things that would be useful. I mean, first of all, those unit tests are essential. They're very important. But thinking broadly before you submit a PR about various scenarios of use, maybe, ways in which one might reasonably use Gen3 beyond how it is that you yourself on your project are using it, will probably go a long way to helping come up with solutions that are appropriate for the product. It would be helpful if you have the capability to do some kind of basic security scanning on what it is you're submitting, find if there's vulnerabilities in packages that you're trying to use or things like that. That will save us both a lot of time. When things go through our build pipeline, we do a full assessment to make sure that what's going into our core product and what we're deploying keeps us within our FedRAMP compliance. And so it would be helpful if you have some mechanism to kind of pre-game that a little bit on your side. That would always be helpful. And I guess, yeah, I'm trying to think. You brought this up in the context of testing, Michael. So I'm trying to think of, what are enablers rather than getting into actual code recommendations. But I think those two, making sure you have a robust set of unit tests, making sure you've thought through scenarios of use beyond the boundary of your project, and doing any security scanning which is available to you would be really helpful.
That makes sense. Thanks. Any other questions from the attendees?
Yeah, a good question would be, just like Peter was saying, so what would be some of the common security scanning tools that have been used and are helpful to bring the code to a level necessary to be able to be allowed into the common general code?
Peter, do you have any
I actually
off the top of your head? I don't know if you're
yeah,
prepared to
I'm
answer.
actually not sure if we're if it's appropriate to discuss the specific security scanning. and what we do for vulnerabilities. I don't know, Bob, if you have advice on that. And we use some tools that are available. I don't know if detailing that out is actually
But why don't we, I don't know if Clint's on the line. Why don't we take this offline and, I think between the steering committee, including Plum, and we can give advice to the community. And it should be pretty easy to give advice to the community about how to scan the code. We need to do this anyway for containers coming in, so we can think about how to give that advice.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, what I can say, anything which checks for, well, any available tool, commercial or open source, that scans for vulnerabilities at different levels can only help. And following guidelines, being aware of just basic web security considerations, even basic OWASP. Most changes to the system probably won't be making changes that would be affecting that, but I mean, even just bearing those things in mind, and attempting to conform more or less to the way that the code exists today, would be generally helpful. But yeah, I hope we can give you more detailed input from
Thank
the
you for that, Peter. I appreciate it. Just even the pre-commit hooks that, generally speaking, everybody is required to apply, I think would help the community, right, understand some of these concepts. And certainly I feel like those are things that are generally like best practices, so it's not like secret sauce behind them.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Plum, and we'll publish out whatever we can, run it past Clint and see how deeply we can share.
I had a question about more complicated cases. So I guess an example from our side is this idea of fine-grained access control. And it's I think it's a community need. It's complex. It's going to take time to implement. I think it's partially in the roadmap or being thought of at some level, but it's like a year or two into the future. So I'm just wondering how, and that requires maybe more extensive coordination, both within the Gen3 team and also outside the Gen3 team in the community to, define what is actually meant by that from a usability kind of product kind of level. So I'm just I guess seeking advice or from the Gen3 team on how we might approach that and how we as the community organize ourselves to make such a big implementation, I guess, easier or as easy as possible forward.
I think that's a great example. I know Gen3 may not be moving fast enough on this. I've had discussions with them about this, but I think we can set up some community discussions and try to figure out with community support how we could move to fine-grained access control faster. So I don't know, maybe the steering committee could take this up of how to actually structure some very near-term discussions about who could do what to sort of move us there faster. I think on Gen3 side, we were thinking of using the open source key cloak as a basis for that. The first thing to do is see if that aligns with what others want to do. And if not, what are the software that might be used for that, or whether it would be added to Fence. But to have that discussion and to figure out, even if it didn't go over all of Gen3, could we bring up a version Gen3 sooner rather than later with fine-grained access control? I know some of our projects are requiring that too. And so let's start with the steering committee. When I'm down there next week, we could have some discussions. And if we could do a landscape analysis and then probably set up a call to figure out with a brainstorming session what our options are.
I mean, that, just to reiterate what Bob said, that sounds great to set up a process. I think, yeah, we discussed kind of in the abstract working groups, but we need to fill in some details on what that looks like and how to execute that. But I think that's kind of the overall vision.
If I can jump on this train that Bob is driving, I agree. I think that would be great. I'm really that would be very exciting to us as the development team to get that kind of input. It would be really useful to understand like concrete use cases that would help a lot in technical assessments of tools and also prioritizing features. That would be a fantastic way to get this going.
All right, and that, yeah, so we can coordinate maybe gathering those kind of use cases or user stories from the community. So that would be, if that's a valuable thing, which is good. Yeah.
Just to move it ahead now, Stephen, are you thinking of Keycloak extensions defense or some other path?
I'm not sure. I'm not the right person to ask.
Okay, let's try to figure out what people are
We can-
imagining and how to get there faster rather than sooner, faster rather than slower.
But yeah, next week, I think we'll have the right people in the room. We can have a chat in person about it.
Any other questions? Before I forget, while somebody's thinking of a question, I did want to plug an event next week that the Open Commons Consortium is putting on how to implement Gen3 using Helm charts in AWS. So I'm going to put the link here in the chat just in case people haven't heard about that. This is not done by CTDS, it's done by OCC, but it might be of interest to the community.
Michael, thank you first of all for doing that. I appreciate it. It's a shameless plug on our side too, right? But we wanted to show the essential concepts behind it. But this is a series that we're going to be running where Gen3 from 0 to 1 to 1 is going to be the first part. And then we're going to be showing over this year everything else that you can do with Gen3. And this is just the beginning. So I hope that you guys are able to join. I know most of you guys are already running Gen3, but also at the same time, if you guys have anybody that wants to run a data commons, join the call. Please share this information with them. We really appreciate it. And we've worked really hard to hopefully have a really great tutorial.
Thanks, Colin. Okay.
And if there are other community events around Gen3, just send them to us so that we can help to advertise them.
I think just to say from our side, this has been really super useful. Thank you, and we're really looking forward to, I guess being more of a part of it and putting in pull requests and issues and having more of these conversations on Slack. So we've got a few things, I guess, lined up for discussion that we'll use the new format for shortly. But I guess just to mention one of them, we've done a Keycloak integration with Gen3, so I think that's something that was possibly maybe more broadly useful, and I guess we're happy to share that, and but maybe this is one of those alignment things of do we have the discussion? Well, we're going to do it in the wrong order because we've already done the implementation, but have that wider discussion of does that product fit? And is it something that the community is kind of interested in having and contributing? So yeah, we'll start those conversations, but thank you.
can you get us, what can you get? I mean, that's a very near-term interest for a lot of people. Could you, is that Keycloak code publicly available somehow or not?
I think not currently, but I'm maybe putting Irene on the spot here if she wants to comment on that one. I think it's not publicly available at the moment.
But I'm
I
not there
think
till
it's
next week.
internal only.
Did you say for next
What were you
week?
saying?
I said I'm not there till next week, so I think there's plenty of time, Claire.
We can have a discussion internally and look at what it would mean to make that public for sure.
Was someone, I interrupted someone, was someone uh, going to point us to the location?
No, it's internal only, and I wasn't the person to implement it, so I'll have to have a look.
Thank you. It would really, you'd make a lot of people very happy, and we could try to make sure, you know, to give you whatever support you needed so that we could, you know, basically, we'd like to move to a version of Gen 3 where we could have multiple authorization engines. One could be Keycloak, one could be Fence. And, you know, we want to give your team a lot of credit for doing that. This is something we've had discussion about. So I think that's very important, and I'm really glad you spoke up. But, you know, if you could even give us some high level information about it, and, you know, you know, it's a major change to the code base. So we'd like to get started thinking about how we can bring this in. If, you know, if you could if it's possible to make the code available. Or if we could work together to make it available. Has anyone else integrated Keycloak?
I did want to spend just another minute or a couple minutes if you like. If anybody has ideas for subsequent Gen 3 forums, I don't think we have a plan precisely for the next one. So this is also a good opportunity to have your thoughts heard on what you think a useful discussion would be. You can also follow up with me in Slack or email or wherever if you have ideas.
I mean, one thing I wouldn't mind hearing is when ready, how new, you know, how Keycloak was integrated, you know, what lessons they learned about that. And, you know, just a general discussion, that's a significant achievement. They had to do a lot of work, and, you know, that may get a broader discussion up. And so, you know, that may take a while to prepare, but that's the kind of thing that would be great for this community forum.
Good idea. Okay. Final call for ideas for forum or thoughts or feedback or questions about the presentations today. All right. Bob, do you have any parting words?
No, not at this point. You know, I think this is close to a year's worth of these forms every other month. So that's a significant milestone. And they'll certainly continue, and you know, we'll be doing a few other things that well, we hope to announce some other things, to some other resources to support this forum. But I do want to mention that there is now a process for regular review. We didn't talk about it, as explicitly as we might have, but there is a process for regular review of third-party community pull requests. This is the first time we've ever, had that process with resources. So, that is a significant milestone, and I want to I just want to highlight that. And if you do have topics for future forums, please let us know. That's all I had. So thank you very much. And over to you, Michael.
No, thanks, Bob. Nothing more to add. So thanks everyone. Thanks for your contributions. Thanks for all your thoughts. I'll post these slides and a recording soon. So they should be available quite soon. The repo is already public and issues are already on though, so you can start using those right away.
If Craig is Craig still on? Craig, can you just remind people where we are with the release schedule of 3.2 of what's
Yes,
coming out when?
of course.
If-
So,
if
yeah,
you
so
have a do you have a 50-foot sign or anything you could put up, or is
no 50-foot sign, but yeah, so currently we have the repos are public. There's one called there's a Commons app, which is sort of the web app that you can fork off, and we've forked 2 repositories off of that already.
can you show that? I mean,
Sure, I can show that. Let me get that up really quick. Yeah.
Always have to be ready, Craig.
What was that? Yeah, I guess I sure should. Hang on 1 second. Yeah, sorry, 1 second. I'll also push this in the chat. This is the app repo. Did I get it all? Hang on, give me 1 second. Confirm that works. Do it again, just to make sure. Yeah, that second one's the better one. Okay, and then let me share really quick. Yeah.
In case not everybody knows what 3.2 is, this is a lot of new improvements to the front end for Gen 3.
Yeah, so this is a base repository for the 3.2 data commons. So there's 1 of 2 things you can do. You can there's a sample app which you can pull from the Gen 3 front end framework repo, which I should probably get up as well. And then you can develop there. But if you really want to deploy commons, the idea is to fork off of this one. Commons front end app, and then you can start adding configuration there. We do need to add a lot more documentation. It's a little spotty right now, but we're working on that along with everything else. So currently, discovery page works pretty reliably. So is Explorer page. We're working on data dictionary and workspaces. Profile, we'll have some improvements coming on soon. Explorer page will have we have it working, but we have a redesign in progress, so we'll be implementing that soon. And then a bunch of other miscellaneous documentation, a modal system, and we also have to do like login and log out and timeout issues and things like that, which still need to go in. But we're converging. We also have when it gets merged, we have a pull request in for Helm charts to add in the front end framework into Helm charts, so you can run that. You can actually run it either in alongside with Portal, where Portal is the front end and front end framework is sort of hanging off of it, or vice versa, where front end framework is it root, and then the Portal runs off of /Portal, or you can just run the front end framework directly off of Helm charts. So once that gets in, that should be available as well.
so what's coming up by the end of March and what's coming up by the end of April?
End of March, we'll probably have more refinements to explore, some documentation on discovery, so you can actually sort of add columns and add features to render your own data. We'll have some improvements there. We'll have some of the modals finished, so we'll login timeout session timeout should work, and you'll get a notification. The end of April, we hope to have the redesign of Explorer done, finalize Discovery, have data dictionary available. Query is already in there, so that works. And then in May, we're working on workspaces, although we're currently working on workspaces now. We might have it by the end of April. I'm just not, considering the other workload we have. It probably will be sometime in May.
So if someone is starting a new Commons, do you recommend they do that in April, May, June, or what month do you recommend?
I would recommend you could start probably late April. If if you did need workspaces, you could probably start sooner, and we can help talk you through whatever you need to do to configure it and make sure that we have support in there for doing it. If you do need workspaces, I'd say wait till May when we're done. But with that, or have most of it working. But that's where we're at now. And we'll continuously be improving documentation, and of course always around to help answer questions and help get things configured and solve bug issues and everything else that we might have. But yeah, so that's where we're at. I mean, if you wanted to start off just playing with it, you could do it now.
Anyone on the phone playing with 3.2 yet?
Yeah, I have. It's pretty good. Big improvement from the previous version. It's like 90% there, I'd say. So yeah.
Thank you.
Matthew, are you thinking of giving up your current job so you could get 100% there in the next week or two, then just taking a break?
Well, I don't know if I have the front end skills for that, but
Okay,
maybe another time.
okay.
But yeah, so we're working as fast as we can on this. And as I said, we'll anyone who wants to start working on it, using it today, let me, I'm happy to, we're happy to get feedback and listen and help as much as we can.
And we'll be setting up some 3.2, I guess, by the end of March. Well, I can't remember when does the imaging hub come up?
It's ready, except we just need to get platform to help us spin it up. But we have that repo already forked for the front end, and I believe we're just in the process of setting it up.
Okay, Craig, let's work with platform to do that.
For sure.
I know that they're short-staffed because of vacation.
Yes.
But
that is one holdup right now, I think, is the major one. So
we'll try to work a workaround on that in some recent events in the last couple of days.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, any other questions from anyone? So end of April, people can start to use it if they're adventurous, correct?
I'm back on it. Yes, definitely. I mean, if you can start playing with it some today, you can configure once. Actually, I would wait until we can announce when the Helm chart PR gets merged in, and then you can run Helm charts, and we'll have a sample values file, so you can spin one up and start playing with it using Helm.
Okay.
Great. Thanks for the update, Craig and teams. All right. Well, then I think we'll say goodbye for today. Please reach out on Slack. Talk to you there. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.